Hey guys, today we're going to talk in depth about fishing rod spine. I promised earlier that I'd make a video that would go in depth about rod spine and what it is and why it happens and all this stuff. So today we're going to hit part one of why fishing rods have spines and how that happens in the manufacturing process. Later on I'll show you how to find a fishing rod spine and what to do when you have multiple spines, and also talk about where the rod spine should be in the rod. So for now, we're going to move on to how fishing rods are made so that we can understand why fishing rods have spines. So a fishing rod manufacturer will purchase sheet material from an outside manufacturer or a different company. This sheet material will be made of whatever sub layer they're going to use, which could be graphite, could be fiberglass, or it could be a mix, could be carbon fiber. And then the sheet material will also have a resin or epoxy layer that's coated onto it. Now this epoxy layer has not seeped into the material, it hasn't been activated, it's just simply basically coated on in a basically dormant form. This sheet material is then cut to size, which is normally trapezoidal shape. Sometimes they can add multiple sheets of material. You might stick an additional section up in the forward length of the rod to change its action or power. And at this point, the sheet material will have a very small double-sided tape layer right at the top here. That will be taped to the mandrel. Now these mandrels are normally made very precise, and basically your mandrel is the heart of your fishing rod. Every mandrel is different. Every rod has a different mandrel because the mandrel will create whatever powers and actions you're looking for. So the rod company will pull back their double stick layer of tape. They will tape their material to the mandrel initially such that it won't move and it will stay nice and tight when they wrap their material. They will then they will roll the mandrel and wrap the material around the mandrel. This is normally done on a machine to get it really tight. Once this is done, they will send this into an oven where the epoxy and resin will liquefy. It will seep into all the fibers of whatever sublayer you're using and will create a solid mass around your mandrel. From then, the mandrel will be pulled out. The rest of the rod will be finished for exactly whatever it's for. It might be painted, might be clear coated. You might get guides put on or handles if it's being sold as a manufactured rod, or it might just be sold as a blank. But it's important to note here that the end of the sheet actually sometimes curls around the blank. And in this case, I have actually what looks like a full 360-degree cover of the end of the material. Now, not every rod wraps around with the end like this one does. I've seen some that only wrap around maybe 180 degrees. I've seen some that wrap around twice. But most rods do wrap somewhat. Not too many rods I've seen actually have a straight end, and that is for reasons of stresses. When you have a stiff end like that and then you bend the rod, you'll have a high stress concentration in this linear length of the rod, and it can cause a weakening of the blank. And so most good manufacturers will avoid that. So essentially you'll end with some sort of curvature. But overall, that is how a fishing rod blank is created. So now that we understand how fishing rods are made, I'm going to show you exactly how a spine comes out of that process. Here we have an illustration of the butt end of the rod. This dark black line that curls around is the graphite sheet rolled around the mandrel. Eventually this sheet has to stop. Now this end point will overlap your beginning point. Now it might not be right here where you have this nice acute angle, but it might overlap down here. It might not even overlap at all, or essentially it would overlap all the way around the rod. If it ends over here, you'll notice that we'd have 3 layers exposed, but when it overlaps right here or over here, you'd have an additional layer for some angle in the rod. Now this additional layer is adding additional strength. Graphite, by nature, is stronger in tension than it is compression. When you bend a rod, characteristically, the outside of the rod is getting longer. The inside of the rod is getting shorter. So your outside is in tension and your inside is in compression, because the molecules and the elements are getting pushed together since this distance is getting shorter, and on the outside your molecules and elements are getting pulled apart because the distance is getting longer. Now, since graphite is stronger in tension than compression, the spine and the additional strength wants to be on the outside because that's where it's strongest. So if your spine is not on the outside of your curve, say it's on the right side or left side or even the underside, it's going to want to twist until it gets to the outside. So your spine has to be on the outside. And you'll notice when you're using a rod that doesn't have a spine on the outside of the bend that it wants to twist in your hand. You'll also notice that when you're spining a rod, which I'll show you later, when you're spining a rod, the rod will get into its natural bend. It will put this spine on the outside, and that is how your rod should be made. Your rod spine should not be on the right, it should not be on the left, it should not be on the bottom. Now, if it's on the bottom, that's not necessarily terrible, and I'll explain that later. But for now, you understand how rods are made, and you understand why a rod spine is created in the process. So stay tuned for later videos, and I'll show you how to find a spine, what to do with multiple spines, where your rod spine should be in your rod, and from there, you'll know everything about fishing rod spines.